What if your profession led you to witness history and powerful stories firsthand, but it was your own personal losses that inspired your most profound work? Today's guest brings 45 years of journalism covering presidents and pivotal events into the world of political thrillers steeped in grief, resilience, and healing. I'm Michelle, and this is Radiant Moments. Joining us is John DeDakis, award-winning novelist, former CNN editor, writing coach, and advocate for using storytelling as a pathway through grief. In this episode, John shares how he turned trauma into transformation through writing, the art and craft of storytelling, and wisdom for anyone with a story waiting to be told. John, welcome to Radiant Moments. Your career in journalism spans 45 years, with incredible roles from White House correspondence during the Reagan era to editing for Wolf Blitzer at CNN. How did you first get your start in this demanding field?
Hi, Michelle, and thank you for this opportunity. It's good to be with you. Goes all the way back to the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I was going to go into law and politics with my dad. My dad was a lawyer, and then I was going to go into politics. But the Vietnam War was very controversial at the time, causing a lot of consternation on college campuses. And I felt bombarded from both the left and the right to take a position for or against the war. And so I felt that it was necessary to volunteer at a campus radio station in order to get a better sense from the perch of journalism, objective journalism, to get a better understanding of the facts. And so the long story short is that I had to go into the Army. I had to enlist to go into the Army. And when I enlisted, I got orders to Vietnam. They were changed at the last minute to Germany. And I spent 2.5 years at the headquarters of the American Forces Radio and Television Network in Frankfurt, Germany. I was doing interviews for a special events radio unit, and the first interview I did was with Alfred Hitchcock. And so that was a moment. That was a pivotal moment, and I discovered what I was good at and what I loved. So when I got out of the Army, I went back to school, got my degree in journalism, and that's what I did for the next 45 years. And it wasn't until later that I started writing fiction.
So your journey started from circumstances that were imposed on you by the world's environment.
Very much so, yes. And that's basically the way we live life. It doesn't turn out the way we expect. In real life, it's a crisis. In journalism, it's a story. But in fiction, it's a plot twist. And we all have plot twists that cause our life to go in a new and unexpected direction. And that's what makes life interesting. But we need to be resilient and be able to respond to it in a constructive way so that we can make the best of it.
Yes, and it's the same in caregiving as well. We go from crisis to crisis, and it alters our daily lives, but also our lives as whole, because nobody expected to step into the role of caregiving. It's definitely a plot twist, and it keeps us on our toes. I use fiction in my day-to-day to escape and to think of other things and give me something that is different from the life that we lead as a self-care technique.
Right.
So
it really is self-care. I think that's a good word.
And so I really appreciate when new fiction comes across my path, because it's something that you can immerse yourself in and just escape for a little while. So I'm really looking forward to finding out more about that. That rigorous news world, you transitioned into writing political thrillers, creating your protagonist, Lark Chadwick, who channels not only journalism but personal grief and strength. What inspired you to take this new creative path, John?
Well, as a journalist, it's a firing offense to make things up. So it took me a while to give myself permission to write fiction. So I first started doing a biography. I was researching a biography of a friend of mine who was murdered. But it became time-consuming, expensive. I was finding out details about the guy that his family didn't know. So it was just becoming very fraught. And my wife suggested that I should take some of my research and pour it into a fictional story. So that's what I did, and discovered that it was much easier to do that. I gave myself permission to do it. I could do it in my jammies at my convenience, and it actually turned out pretty well that way.
I love when you say that you do it in your jammies, that you've got that freedom to just be so relaxed and in a different world to a high world of journalism and being on show and everything. I think that just leads to creativity there. Being in your jammies, that's the best thing.
Well, and I write as a woman, and there was a woman at a writers event that I was at in Belfast, Northern Ireland, a couple of years ago. She raised her hand and said, "What do you wear when you write?" And, jammies doesn't really answer the question unless you've got lace on your jammies, but I don't.
Yes, I can understand that they were hoping for a little nugget of gold there of something secret.
Yeah.
John, you chose to write your novels from a female perspective, which is unusual for a male author. Can you share why you made that choice and what you've learned about writing for across genders?
It wasn't calculated.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started writing, someone suggested that I should write in a way that stretches who I am. I've never been a woman, at least not in this life, so I gave it a try, and I discovered that emotions are not gender specific. We all have the exact same emotions. It's just that the women in my life are more willing to share their emotions, and they're more articulate about the emotions they choose to share. So I find women fascinating, and I've worked at CNN 25 years, so that's 25 years worth of conversations with young women in their early to mid-20s who would tell me about their jobs and their relationships and their careers and their families. And I just asked questions about what it's like to be a woman. And I learned a lot. I mean, one early nugget was that I asked one of the anchors I worked with, who was gorgeous, I said, "What's it like for guys to come on to you all the time?" And she said, "I can tell in the first 20 seconds if I'm safe." I never have to worry about being safe in a conversation. And that's when I realized that being a woman means playing defense.
Yes, and the part that resonates with me is that 20 seconds. If I think about my life and some of my female family or my female friends, that 20 seconds, and that can apply to like going into a medical appointment with a male doctor or a male nurse, even like day-to-day just interactions. I think that is so genuinely true for a lot of women that you do. Within the first few seconds of a conversation, you can know whether this is going to be okay or not, and you have to be on guard. So it's definitely interesting that you've also experienced that and you've
Well,
found out about it.
yeah, I mean, you really have to navigate things.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. So, writing, after all, can be more than storytelling. It can be a healing journey. Your personal life has been deeply marked by loss, your sister's suicide and your son's overdose. How did putting these painful experiences into words help your healing process?
It helped, I think, by just giving me inner clarity, helping me understand myself. But I didn't really set out to do that. I just set out to tell stories. The the rule of thumb for writing fiction is write what you know. One of the things, looking back on it, I've got 6 books over 20 years looking back over it. Everyone has grief and loss, and it doesn't just mean the loss of a loved one. It can be the loss of a job, a pet, a relationship, health, innocence, any number of things. It's a universal experience. And I've learned that if, our society tries to anesthetize the pain, but if we move toward the pain and mine it, I think that we accomplish 2 things. It's therapeutic and cathartic for you, the writer, but I think it's also helpful for the reader because it's telling a story that is accessible. It's authentic. For lack of a better word, it can be entertaining. And part of what makes it entertaining is its authenticity. So I've learned a lot over time, and I've also learned how to help people capture that pain and mine it and turn it into art.
Beautiful. In that it's not simplistic in nature overall, but the journey to actually working through a traumatic experience can be solely owned by the writer. And I know for some people, sharing those traumas are really hard, and this would give them an outlet that's more personal, that they don't have to share if they don't want to.
That's true. Right.
So for listeners who may be struggling with trauma or grief and want to write but feel unsure how to start, what encouragement or first steps do you offer in order to help them to get that process going?
Whoa. First, I'll say I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a
Mm,
professional. I'm a professional writer. And
mm,
so I can only talk about from my own personal experience and from the students that I've had and the things I've learned in the classes I've taught. Where to start? I think you start where you are. And I think that you need to give yourself permission to write without feeling the pressure to share it with anyone. It's a matter of tapping into whatever is there. It's getting it out on the page in a safe way that is you're processing it. And there are any number of ways to process things through art, painting, music, poetry, journaling, storytelling. I mean, there are so many ways that you can do that and channel it. And I think that it's healthy to do that because grief and pain are going to stay with you. But if it's not dealt with in a constructive way, it's going to fester. It's going to corrode. And I'll make this observation, and you tell me if I'm off base. But if you think about it, most of the mass shootings that are done, with one or two exceptions, are done by men. And my hunch is, without making a generalized statement, my hunch is that many men are reluctant to share their pain. Crying is considered a weakness, whereas women cry easily. And I hate to make generalizations, but crying is an emotional safety valve. And if it is bottled up, if it's undealt with, often the tears can become bullets. And I think that that is where we are if we're dealing with unresolved grief.
yes, it is definitely a challenging space, even for my boys to be vulnerable in sharing those emotions. And I think it starts with creating that at a young age in those really challenging moments where they've gone through trauma or grief from whatever process they're doing in their medical journey. I think they try and bottle it up because that's what society has projected. And I think you're right that it is a harder space for men to women because it's not as dramatized to be emotional. Whereas for men, particularly my boys, even coming home from school, for example, and saying, "Oh, I'm not allowed to cry because I'm a boy," because
Yeah,
another
and who
boy.
and who says that? Who says
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. And so it's not household to household, it's a societal norm that has become that is harming their emotional well-being long term as they get older. And because it gets harder as you get older, because it's a pathway you've been taught, and to unlearn it is a very difficult process. Not impossible, but
I think
difficult.
I think too that it's hard to share, but I think it's hard for people to be around emotions,
Mm.
to be around grief and loss because there's this empathy that you have for another person, but it's like what do you say, what do you do, how do you help? And I think that causes a lot of understandable reticence to make that connection, and consequently people either don't say anything, they go the other way because it's too uncomfortable, or they try to offer platitudes that aren't often very helpful, or they try to solve the problem, which isn't necessarily helpful either. And often it's less is more. Just letting the other person know that you see them and that you care. And, after my son died and I went back to work, there was a woman I worked with, and, when she came around the desk, she said, "I'm a word person, but I don't have any words." And she gave me a hug. And I mean, that was very powerful. And, you don't have to, just being there means so much.
Yes, it does mean a lot. Even sometimes just being there in silence,
That's
just
right.
letting the other person know that you're there if they need. And when you said before that emotions can create an uncomfortable space if you don't know or you haven't expressed those emotions yourself, you don't know how to manage them. If you haven't experienced them, you can't then be there in that space. It's very true. When you lose somebody or there is grief or loss or trauma, if the other person hasn't experienced it, they can find that uncomfortable or overcompensate because they just don't know how that feels for another person. So I think you're very true in that.
Yeah, and I think one thing is just ask the other person what they need. How
Mm.
can I help? What do you need? Keep it simple.
Very true. Very powerful. John, as a keynote speaker and a coach, you've seen many people find peace through writing. Can you share an inspiring example of how writing has transformed someone's grief or your own?
I can speak for myself for sure, because transform is a good word, because I think there is healing. Grief changes you. You're a different person, and it's not like you just get over it or move on. I don't like that I don't like closure. I don't like that word. Maybe other people do, but I'm a different person now. And I think I'm a different person in a lot of different ways. Part of the way I know I'm different is because I do journal and I try to examine my life. One of the things I've discovered is that I'm not as afraid as much anymore. I mean, I think fear is part of the grief process. It's not an official part of the grief process, but I think that when we lose someone close to us or whatever kind of loss is there, there's a fear of how are we going to live now without that in our life, without that pet, without that job, without that person. And so I've learned to realize that when you can face and move forward through the pain and through the fear, the byproduct is confidence. And so it's counterintuitive, but I would say one of the transformations is that I think I'm more of a confident person than I was before Stephen died. Who knew?
Yeah, definitely. When you say confidence, when you journal and you kind of look at who you are and where you're at, you can see that you're still there. You're just different. It's a different space. That void that loss or trauma has caused does change you. But I think with reflection and working through it, I think you become a stronger person as well in that space, leading to being able to have confidence to keep going.
Yes.
Um, and I
And
think
one of the stages of grief, one of the new stages is finding meaning. And I
Mm.
think that that's a really worthwhile thing to be thinking about if you're in the middle of it. But I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were going to say
no,
something
no,
more.
that's pretty much what I was going to lead towards was in a journey where you're experiencing trauma, grief, and loss, often especially in a medical process that we go through with our loved ones and watching them suffer or watching them develop trauma over something. You're grieving as well, just differently. But I think if you can't find meaning in that process and your why, then that makes that journey of, I guess I would say, recovery. It's partly recovering from that loss or that traumatic experience. That in itself is a powerful thing.
You've raised an interesting question, and that's the
Mm.
why.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in some cases, we're never going to know the why.
Mm-mm.
And I think we can over spiritualize it
Mm.
and ascribe to God or the divine or the universe, motives that we have no clue what's going on behind the scenes, if anything. One of the things that I have answered for myself in terms of the why is that, and it's not why as in this happened so that this would happen, but what I've discovered is that and maybe you've had this experience too, the farther you get away from the moment of bereavement, you come across others for whom it's fresh. And one question I get a lot is, does time heal? And will this get any better? Because they're in the middle of it. And it's like tunnel vision. You can only see your own pain. And the rest of the world is going on. They're laughing. And it's like, this is not my experience. And one of the things I've been able to experience is to be able to offer comfort and encouragement to someone who's fresh in it. And one of the things that I tell them is that what you're going through now will be something that you will be able to draw from so that years from now, you too might be able to offer some comfort and encouragement to someone for whom it's fresh. It's not it's not necessarily the cosmic explanation for life, but it is the way life is lived and can be lived so that we help each other go through life and experience it.
And I think the other thing is when supporting another person in their trenches of the moment is that at times it is more manageable as you kind of come away from that moment. But there might be moments where something just deeply reminds you. People use the word trigger. I think it's your subconscious, because that's where most of our memories are stored long term. Those deep moments of smells, the five senses that kind of bring it to, is that there may be moments where you're stopped for that moment, but they're moments, and you get to have joy in the memory. And you
Yeah.
need to find the joy in the memory in those moments where something is brought up, because you have made progress. You have found the why. And
Yeah, almost easier said than done, but everything you're saying
100%.
resonates with me. I mean, I remember doing a series of reports when I was a young reporter on grief.
Mm,
And one of my consultants, Lowell Mays, was the chaplain for the county sheriff's department, and his job was to notify next of kin. And so he was my consultant on the project, and his family experienced profound grief and loss as well. And when I interviewed him for the program, he said, grief is like holding an inner tube underwater. You can do it for a while, but every now and then it's going to bubble to the surface. And I don't think I understood it as well at the time as I did years later when I experienced the losses of my own. But it really is true. Things can happen that are unexpected, they're powerful, and you have no control over them. They just happen. And trigger is a good word, and it's a loaded word because now we're supposed to be, we're supposed to have warnings, warning, this could, trigger you. And I think that on one hand, that's probably sensitive because for some people it is post-traumatic stress. I mean, the horror that they went through is still being processed. And so the triggers aren't just bringing up sadness, it's bringing up something more visceral.
yes.
And so that's something that I need to remind myself of. And yet, on the other hand, I think the goal is, and I would be interested to hear what a psychologist would say. I think the goal is to be able to face whatever the trauma was and find ways to work through it, find ways to make meaning out of it, find ways to manage the intense emotions so that we can go on living productively as opposed to being totally incapacitated by the experience.
I totally agree. It is 100% real. It's 100% there. And being able to acknowledge it and be supported in the space. And sometimes it's so intense that you do need the support of a psychologist or
Yeah,
somebody external to help you, because some traumas can cause severe PTSD, and
exactly.
that has a profound impact. And I think as individuals, if we can recognize that we're not doing okay and we can seek that help and support, and it may not be lifelong help and support, it may be a chunk of time, but I think that enables us to find a level of control in ourselves to be able to move forward and function.
I like that. I like that. I think that you've put your finger on something really important
Mm,
because we spend a lot of our lives regretting the past and worrying about the future, and we're no good in the moment. And it's only the moment over which we have any control. We still have agency. We can still make choices with our lives. And there are good choices and bad choices. But if we are in the moment, I think, if we can train ourselves or get training for how to live mindfully in the moment, then I think that's a key to being able to live forward by taking agency, making choices, and having the power over our lives. In spite of how life comes at us against our will and not on our timeline, we are not, I don't think, doomed to just be living passively as life happens to us. I think that we can find ways to push back and to find a way around the obstacles that are there so that we can live in a way that is true to who we are, our whole selves. And that's a journey. I think that's probably a lifelong struggle, but it's worth it because especially if we see victories along.
Completely agree. And I also think there has in the past been a stigma about seeking help. And I think I've seen more of a softening towards the support of seeking help, especially with access to social media and stuff. I think psychologists are using the space really effectively to show that it's okay and that it's powerful and beneficial for people to have that. And I think that that's also something that has changed in society as well, which is
We
really
still have a
powerful.
long way. We still have a long way to go.
Very true. And it's just starting. And I'm hoping that it continues to grow because seeking help is one of the most powerful tools a person who is unable to help themselves or to be able to process it on their own. Talking about it and getting help is powerful.
And I wonder if one of the reasons people don't seek help is that they think they're going to be told to do something. And I think good therapy helps you find your own clarity. The questions are designed to help you go deep. I mean, my grief counselor would say, well, how did you feel about that? It was like, well, I felt terrible, but the goal was to get me to articulate it and to put words to it and try to then make meaning out of it. And I think that all too often we feel, they're just going to tell me to stop doing that. And they're not. I mean, find a counselor who's going to challenge you to find your answers and to move forward.
And provide you with empowerment because ultimately that's what they're trying to do is give you self-empowerment to be self-confident in how you manage a situation that is less than ideal.
Well, and the confidence comes by facing your fears, not by the absence of fear, but by harnessing it and going forward anyway. It's sort of courage is fear in action.
So true. Such a true statement. On our listeners, if you guys feel moved by John's story, I want you to pause and reflect. If there's a story inside you that needs an outlet, perhaps writing is the path to your own radiance. Your path to publishing wasn't easy. 10 years, 39 agents, 14 major manuscripts revisions. What kept you going and what did you learn about persistence in this process of creating?
I think that the reason I kept going forward is A, I really wanted to be published. B, I saw that I was getting better. And one of the ways I was getting better is I was going to a writers' conference every year, and it had agents, writers talking about craft. You were making friends and connections. I found my agent at this particular writers' conference. And so I think that there was enough encouragement along the way and being able to objectively see that I was making progress, that it became possible to take the long view because I wasn't looking 10 years ahead because every time I thought, this is the one, this is when it's going to happen. If I'd known it was going to take 10, I think I still probably would have done it that way, but I was a lot younger then. I probably had more time. Now self-publishing is much more accessible, so I might have gone the self-publishing route instead of the traditional route. But either way, it's possible to get published if you are patient with yourself, apply yourself to getting better, listening to the feedback that you get from people who will tell you what's not working so that you can make corrections. And I think encouragement goes a long way. And if you can find those champions in your life, that does make the job a lot easier and it makes the time go faster.
Can I ask, before you started reaching out to publishers to get your works recognized, did you rely on or request support from friends and family to kind of read what you were doing?
I did. I learned quickly, though, that it's probably better to have beta readers who you don't share a bed or a last name with.
Hmm.
My wife was an early reader at the point where the manuscript was a 150,000 word mishmash. Cindy, she read the whole thing, underlined one word, and said, "Are you sure you want to use that?" Which was great advice. But what about the other 149,999 words?
Yeah.
And she told me years later, she said, "I didn't know if you were any good. I didn't want to break your spirit."
Mm.
And I think that's the danger of having beta readers who are too close to you, because they'll either break your spirit or they'll be so complimentary that they won't be any good at all.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
one of the things I learned, over the years, I've worked with dozens of beta readers, people who are more objective. They care about you as a person, and they will tell you the truth about what's not working. That feedback is invaluable. And so
Yes.
there are some beta readers that I've been with for 20 years who've seen the character evolve, and they know they can tell me honestly. And there are others who have come and gone, and you don't have to pay these people. You can take them to dinner, buy them a drink, get them flowers, whatever. Professional editing can get pricey. Beta
Yes.
readers from friends, that's priceless.
There are genuine souls who can give that in a way that doesn't break your soul, because you put so much of your soul into your work, I'm sure, every day. And that's beautiful. Can I ask, when you coach writers, what's the most common stumbling block you see, and how do you guide them past it?
How much time do we have? There are a lot of stumbling blocks, but I think the very first stumbling block is a lack of self-confidence, the whole imposter syndrome. And what's ironic is that I know some best-selling authors who have imposter syndrome. They've been very successful, and yet when it's time to write the next book, they doubt themselves. Do I really have it in me? Can I make this better? Everybody's going to think I'm a fraud. They're going to be discovering that I really don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah,
And
okay.
to me, that's a common human understanding. But the danger is, especially if you don't have a track record as a writer, you can talk yourself out of even trying because you believe the lies that you're telling yourself. And so I think right from the very beginning, we can cripple ourselves by talking ourselves out of it and telling ourselves we're no good. So it goes back to encouragement. A lot of what I do as a writing coach is offer encouragement.
Encouragement is so important, especially when you don't feel like you're able, or what if somebody finds out that I can't actually write or I can't actually speak so well? Yes, it can be debilitating to experience imposter syndrome, lack of confidence. And it's that taking that next bar up for yourself, that's scary for anybody.
You've put your finger on it. We've circled back to fear. It's part of the fear. And then part of the process, I think, is to understand, what it is you're afraid of and why.
Mm,
Rejection is a big deal,
mm.
not being perfect. Whatever the fear is, ask yourself why. Why is it a big deal? Why am I afraid of being rejected? Because you know what? You will be rejected. But why does that bother you so much? What is it about being perfect or not being perfect that bothers you? Because you know what? You're not perfect. So
100% true.
yeah. And so you can set these impossible standards for yourself. And I think that once you get a better handle and understand the dynamics of fear and why this is bothering you, I think that's an important first step toward getting beyond it.
That's so
Thank
very,
you.
very true. Can I ask, what should an aspiring writer expect when they work with an editor? And how can that relationship be a catalyst for growth, both personally and professionally?
It's a safe place. You can share your writing and get honest feedback. And you'll probably get some encouragement along the way, but you need to be open-minded. You need to be willing to explore the possibility of new ways of doing it. There's one client that I'm working with. He's writing short stories and they're written in third person, first person, third person, it doesn't matter. But what I'm seeing is I've assigned him to do the next draft in first person because third person is feeling a little too detached. And I
Yeah.
want to see if doing it first person is going to free him up to not do so much backstory and to get more into the characters so that we can, as the reader, experience it. So one of the things you can expect is to be challenged, try different things. It's definitely a collaborative relationship of honesty and trust, and everyone's different. What you need might be different than what someone else's needs.
Because everything is individualized. Every step we take in life is individualized, and no two people really walk the same path in identical manners. And I guess I can understand that each client that you work with takes a different approach, because that uniqueness that everybody brings needs a little bit of extra spice in a different space to, help them bloom. So I really do appreciate that.
Different spice in a different space. I like that.
So from the writer's desk to the newsroom, let's talk about John's frontline journalism perspective next, because I think that's really intriguing for me to understand. You've witnessed decades of change in journalism. How has the field evolved since you started, and are you optimistic about the future of journalism?
Well, it's you could say it's also devolved. It has evolved. I mean, primarily because of technological advances. It's getting the news is faster. You can, with the internet, there's more of a reach. You're able to do more research and do interviews with, I'm in Baltimore, you're in Australia. I mean, without that internet, we would not have been able to have this kind of an immediate conversation. But also, what's been happening is that anyone who has a cell phone and has the ability to hit send or publish is a publisher. And yet there is no editor sitting on your shoulder going, "Where'd you get that? How do you know that's true?" And so the internet is just gushing with falsehoods.
Yes.
And at reputable news organizations, and there still are many, there is editorial oversight. People don't understand the rigors that a reporter has to go through in order to get a story in print or on the air. There are several levels of fact-checking and challenging and all of that. Legal gets involved, and people don't understand that. They really think we sit around and go, how are we going to get Barack Obama elected? And it's just not the case. It's not true. And so I think that's one of the things that has been a detriment is that, I'll be honest, Donald Trump has done wonders for undermining trust in journalism.
Yes.
And not only journalism, trust in the intelligence community, the judiciary, the medical community, you name it. And so what ends up happening is that if you can't trust them, who do you trust? You trust him, which is how dictators operate. And so we are now in a point where fake news, people don't know what to believe. They don't know what to believe. And so many people are tuning out. They're just not following the news at all, which is fine if you're a dictator because, you're having your way. You're no longer being held accountable.
Yes.
And so we're in danger right now. Democracy is in danger because the First Amendment to the Constitution in this country is freedom of the press and freedom of speech. And
Yes.
if that gets undermined and eroded, anything goes. And we're right on the cusp of seeing those kinds of freedoms go away. And it happened in Nazi Germany, and it didn't end well.
No, it did not. And from what you're saying, it's like in most areas and aspects of people's lives, no one sees the internal layers of the onion. No one sees how much has to be done before we move to the next layer. And everyone sees the final result, what's in front of you, how you present yourself. But nobody sees that, I got up 5 hours ago to make sure that there was breakfast and all meds were done and all of those things. Nobody sees that. And I guess with it, all of the misinformation that's accessible, knowing what's true and not true is hard because they don't see all of the tight-knit stuff that has to go on before that happens.
Absolutely right. And one thought that I had as you were saying that is that people look to journalism for the truth. As if one news story is going to carry the capital T, this is the meaning of life. And journalism news stories are mosaic tiles.
Mm.
And it takes years for the mosaic, the facts to be put into place so that we can see the bigger picture and what it all means. I mean, it's true, even in covering World War II. Everybody who went through World War II as a soldier, all they saw was this very narrow sliver of what they experienced. And it isn't until later when the historians come in and put it all together that you get a bigger picture of what was going on. And I think that's still true today. We have to understand and take the long view and be patient that, when we're reading the stories or listening to the news or whatever, it's just a little nugget of today. And what it all means in the bigger picture is still to be determined. These are little small t truths that are being placed into the big T, capital T mosaic of the truth.
It's kind of that saying, decades in the making, that every story, there's more to it that no one knows, and that takes decades to peel back to find out the inner truths in that. And when we're talking about what's accessible on the internet, social media and AI are transforming storytelling. Would you say that these new platforms and intellectual technology are blessings, curses, or a bit of both? And how do they fit into journalism and writing as a writer today?
Whoa, lots to unpack. I would say both, a blessing and a curse. I think that the artificial intelligence, I think that the internet, these are morally neutral.
Mm,
It's what we do with them that can cause the problem or can make life better. And it's a mixed bag. I mean, you've got both going on simultaneously. And we're still in a learning curve, especially with artificial intelligence. It can be useful as a research tool, an organizational tool. It can summarize your book into a dust jacket blurb, but it can't create. It
mm,
doesn't know you. It
mm.
doesn't have your experiences to draw upon. And that's what
Yes.
is the essence of what creativity is. So there are shortcomings and there are some real dangers as well. Way too many to go into here. And it's the same with the internet. It's the Wild West. So that means that we as individuals need to be responsible. We need to be discerning. We have to be mindful of how we use them, how we consume them, how we utilize them so that we're doing both using and receiving in a responsible way.
All of that is so very true. And it'd take hours to go through and, into depth into how those kind of impact our world day to day as well. And I'm interested to know, John, what are you working on now and what excites you next with everything that is going on?
Well, I have a couple of projects going on. I'm finishing up a short story for an anthology. That's not my specialty, but I kind of like this one. That's, of course, before the editors had a chance to take it apart. I have a memoir that is being considered by a publisher. The working title is Plot Twists, a memoir on writing and living. These are pivotal moments in my life that brought me to where I am. So it talks about the writing life in my books and how my life influenced the books and vice versa. My wife and I are working on book 7 in the series. Haven't worked on it lately, but that's going on. Probably the biggest thing I'm working on now is I do a lot of writing teaching at writers' conferences and writing literary centers, but I'm now trying to do public speaking and workshop leading for corporate wellness programs and hospitals. And I'm taking it beyond the writing community to help just the average person realize that they too might be able to use writing as a way to heal from grief. Because grief, as I've said before, is everywhere. We've all experienced it. But in the corporate world, it's responsible for something like $74 billion a year in lost productivity due to high turnover, low morale, all those kinds of problems that can get in the way. And so I think that if we can be mindful in the workplace of finding an avenue for letting the grief work its way out in a productive and constructive and creative way, it can add to better morale and more productivity.
That sounds really exciting, especially because most people don't know about it. Most people might hear it in passing, but journaling and being able to write is a powerful asset, I feel. I journal it to help myself, and I think it is wonderful.
And you don't have to be a trained writer. I mean, every one of us has had a conversation with someone. We are communicators by nature. And so that's what writing is. It's communicating, even if it's only with yourself. You use the tools you've got and just use them.
I think that leads straight right into, for our listeners, holding stories, but they're feeling overwhelmed about their caring journey or their medical journey of their loved one. What would be one last piece of wisdom that you would leave them today to help them to process their grief, trauma, and experiences?
Whoa, that presumes I have wisdom. We've sort of touched on these things, but I think you've mentioned journaling, and I journal every day, and it's a way to just examine my life. I do it first thing in the morning, looking back at the day before to see, how did I do? And what did I do? There was one guy who took one of my classes on how to write a memoir, and he was writing a memoir about the death of his wife that happened years earlier. And he said he kept a journal at the time. And when he was writing his memoir, he went back and referred to it. And he said, I'd forgotten how angry I was. And having written it down, he was able to capture the moment, because after he experienced the moment, it was siphoned off. It didn't have the power that it used to have because he processed it in his journal. But he was able to go back and extract it from the narrative because he had moved forward in his life. And yet, in order to tell the story, he had to go back and look back into his life to see what was there. So that's one it's just a suggestion, journal.
I think, a powerful suggestion, because being able to look back at what you've overcome and what you've been able to keep moving forward through is powerful, to show your resilience and the power that you have in your soul and your heart in the journey that you're on as a carer of a loved one in a medical journey. So yes, I totally agree. Journaling is important and valuable beyond measure. It's a nugget that's worth investing time in, even if it's 5 minutes.
Yeah, and give it a try. Give it a try, because there's no right or wrong way to do it.
Sometimes, like talking with my other carers and stuff, the hardest thing is getting started. Feeling like your mind goes me blank when you sit down to write. And sometimes I've got no idea what I need to write. And then as I've written that, oh, look, here goes me. And then you're able to get a flow, and it's kind of just that kick-starting moment.
I have two suggestions based on what you just said. One is, whenever you take on a new discipline, part of it is just sort of figuring out when to do it, how to do it. And so give yourself some time to find the right rhythm and the right time. Trial and error, I think, is part of it. The other thing is to just write, and I'll be more specific about that. One suggestion is to start with a phrase. Yesterday was, and then just start writing. Refuse to pick up the pen. Just keep writing. Set your timer for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Just write. Whatever's there, just let it come out. You're not analyzing it. You're not judging it. Let it come out. Because what you're doing is you're bypassing that internal scolding editor who says, well, you can't say that. And it comes from a place that hasn't been judged yet. And it's coming from a deep personal place. And once it's on the page, you can look at it objectively and go, whoa, what did that mean? It's not for anybody else, but it's just tap into that. Tap into that. Writing is like dipping a straw into your subconscious, and asking that question stirs things up, and it's like taking a sip, and it comes through your fingers and onto the page. It's the way you can journal. It's also the way you can write a novel.
It's brilliant. Really, really think that's
so
powerful.
You say.
Thank you, John. That's just wonderful. Your journey is a really powerful example of resilience and transformation. Thank you for sharing it so openly with us today and with myself. Ladies and gentlemen, that was John DeDakis showing us how storytelling can be a bridge from grief to hope and from silence to a radiant voice. If this episode inspired you, please share it with someone who might need it. Subscribe to Radiant Moments for more stories that nurture resilience and healing. And please, until next time, keep writing your radiant moments. If you're interested in finding out more about John, please visit his website or have a look at his stories. Have a wonderful day.